Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really profound, the hidden toll of our environment, a 31-year reflection on illness and energy. We're going to take a deeply personal, frankly fascinating 31-year journey, exploring a connection that, honestly, so many of us feel right in our bones, but rarely talk about out loud. I'm talking about the unseen, silent link between toxic social environments and physical illness. What we're unpacking today is a chronological evolution of thought. We'll start from a place of real anger and rigid boundaries back in 1995 and follow it all the way to a much more humbled, nuanced perspective in 2026. This isn't just theory either. It's a sharp observation of human nature, power dynamics, and the literal physical price we pay when we swallow our own truths.
So, can our social environment actually trigger physical illness? Man, it's a heavy question. To really understand where this comes from, we have to rewind to 1995. The author of our source material was going through one of the absolute most frustrating experiences a human being can ever endure, helplessly watching a loved one's malignant disease just get worse and worse. Imagine standing there, completely out of direct options, just watching someone you care deeply about deteriorate. And it was during that agonizing, extended period of observation that a very unsettling realization began to take shape.
What's truly fascinating here is the hypothesis that emerged from all that pain. The author realized that, okay, sure, the root cause of a disease might physically reside inside the patient's body, but the trigger, the catalyst that actually coaxes the illness out of hiding, that often comes from the outside. We are talking about the relentless, grinding stress of our everyday environment. You know, the family drama, the toxic workplace, the incredibly draining friendships. If this is true, then healing someone isn't just about handing them medicine. It requires a temporary, radical overhaul of their entire social ecosystem just to isolate that toxic catalyst, which, let's be real, is a near impossible task for both us and the medical system.
Okay, so the absolutely crucial point is this. Who is actually most at risk here? Well, when the author looked closely at friends and other people who fell ill with these types of diseases, a really fascinating and kind of tragic shared profile emerged. These folks shared a delicate hypersensitivity and a sort of spiritual nobility. They were exactly the kind of people who naturally just wanted to beautify their surroundings. But because of that exact trait, they were fundamentally incompatible with the ruthless, power-driven, super-competitive society we actually live in. Their constant desire to make the world softer clashed violently with the world that basically just wants to take.
And this dynamic, it creates a terrible trap. When you're a highly sensitive person living in a blunt force world, you really only have two pretty grim coping mechanisms to deal with that societal friction. On one side, you've got conformity, the classic when in Rome, do as the Romans do approach. You essentially betray your own noble nature just to fit in. And on the other side, you've got avoidance. You don't conform, sure, but you also don't fight back. You just silently swallow your frustration. You ignore that gnawing feeling inside you just to keep the peace and avoid arguing with people who, frankly, simply cannot hear you anyway.
The author uses a deeply visceral metaphor for this, and it hits hard. Suppressing your frustration is literally like having phlegm stuck in your throat that you prefer to swallow inward just to avoid embarrassment. I know it's uncomfortable, it's gross, and it's deeply unnatural. But we do it. We maintain this quiet facade to avoid making waves. The real tragedy here is that those around you see your silence as peaceful acceptance. They are completely blind to the internal war you are fighting. And swallowing that frustration time and time again, it paves a dead-end street directly toward physical illness. Which brings us to a deeply uncomfortable question. Are we actually responsible for our own illnesses simply because we are too good? Does our own noble character make us the perfect prey? You know, there's an old saying, don't be too good. Now, that didn't make much sense to the author in their youth. But it becomes glaringly obvious when you rub up against a selfish society every single day. A society that is constantly looking for a host, looking for someone else's energy to drain so it can fuel its own ambitions. This whole societal dynamic builds perfectly into a concept known as the human staircase. Now, it is basic human nature to want to climb higher, right? To seek cleaner air and a better life. But how do people actually climb? They use stairs. And in a power-driven society, those stairs are literally other people. While some climbers will reach a landing, turn back, and help pull up the people who supported them, opportunists definitely do not. They believe there will always be more stairs available. So they just climb on the backs of the sensitive, the giving, and the noble, completely abandoning them the second they reach the next level. This creates two entirely distinct, warring worlds. On one side, we have the Platonic creator. They are the sensitive base of the staircase. For this person, the peak isn't about status or power at all. The peak is the joy of creation itself. They do things out of love and awareness.
On the flip side, we have the endless climber. This is the opportunist whose world is just a never-ending, exhausting ascent to nowhere. The creator is constantly trying to detach from the climber's world, but the climbers, they keep dragging the creators back in because they literally need the creator's energy just to survive.
So back in 1995, what was the author's answer to all this chaos? You can really feel the fire and the rigidity in their conclusion. The solution was basically to go to war. You must actively fight the toxic environment. You have to lead and absolutely refuse to be led. Stop swallowing your truth just to make other people comfortable. The firm conclusion back then was that to stave off illness, you have to shout your beliefs aloud. You cannot let society dictate who you are. It was a strategy of absolute, unapologetic resistance.
But time changes our perspective, doesn't it? Let's trace this 31-year evolution. Moving on from that fiercely combative stance in 1995, the author spent the next 3 decades simply observing life. And the harsh observation was this: illness strikes utterly unpredictably. It hits all demographics, all personalities. It takes down the fighters and the conformists alike. That realization completely shatters the illusion that we have total control. And so, we arrive at 2026 with a much humbler stance, prioritizing simple self-preservation over an endless, exhausting conflict.
There is a really profound humility in this 2026 reality. As the author notes, 31 years later, I am not smarter. I am just more cautious. When you finally realize there is no absolute, neatly closed truth as to why illness strikes, you stop trying to fight every single toxic person in the room. You realize that constantly battling your environment is really just another way of draining your own energy. The modern-day perspective shifts entirely away from trying to conquer the world, moving instead toward the quiet, simple wisdom of just distancing yourself from the poison.
And that brings us to what is honestly my favorite, most practical concept in this entire explainer, the 90% battery rule. This is the real-world application of that 2026 wisdom. Yes, absolutely help others, be a good person. Go ahead and allocate 90% of your energy to the world. But, and this is a big but, you must never ever be everyone's wailing wall. You have to draw a hard line and lock away that final 10% for your own self-preservation. Because if you let the opportunist take that last 10%, your battery dies. And if your battery dies, well, you become the next casualty.
To really anchor this shift in mindset, the author turns to some ancient wisdom, specifically Maimonides' middle path. The absolutely crucial point here is avoiding life's radical extremes. Look, you don't have to be the silent victim who just swallows every frustration, but you also don't have to be the exhausting crusader shouting at every single injustice you see. The middle path is all about maintaining a steady, healthy balance. It's about navigating the crazy complexities of human relationships without losing your core self and without burning out your vital energy.
This philosophy actually gives us a final, totally actionable framework, the 3 L's of survival. First up, preserve health. This one is entirely in your locus of control. It means making the active, conscious choice not to damage your body for passing trends or societal approval. Second, preserve sanity. Now, this depends pretty heavily on your environment. It requires you to maintain your core humanity even when the world around you completely loses its mind. And finally, minimize damage. This acknowledges what is completely out of your control, the stuff that just comes from above. Your only job here is to deal gracefully with the consequences and try not to make them worse.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought to close out our explainer today. If you drain your battery for others, you won't have the power to heal yourself. It is such a powerful, provocative warning. We've seen the human staircase, we've talked about the literal danger of swallowing our frustrations, and we've learned the absolute necessity of guarding that 10% reserve. So I'm going to leave you with this. Take a hard look at your own life. Who is currently draining your battery? And are you keeping enough power locked away to heal yourself when the time comes? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Seriously, take a look at your own energy boundaries and protect that final 10%.